Good. All right. I was stalling a bit for time so that people planning to be with us on Zoom would not miss anything, but I'm going to assume that perhaps they're ready because, like us, they were present for the worship time. So we'll go ahead and start. If you need to leave before we're finished, please do so with our blessing. We won't be here any later than noon, that much I can guarantee. So, welcome to all of you here and to those whom we will see perhaps later on Zoom. I'd also like to thank Stan and Steve for sticking around. But I understand the overtime pay is excellent here at Christ Church, so that's right. 100 times 0 is still 0. Okay. So as most of you know, today's discussion grows out of a book study. You can see the book all around. That took place here at Christ Church last spring. Amanda Tyler's book, How to End Christian Nationalism, is, I think, an excellent starting point especially for those who are new to the subject. Amanda Tyler herself is, I think, perfectly positioned to have written this book. She is a lifelong Baptist, a woman of deep faith, of deep spirit, and that spirit is something that, at least for me, the longer I read, and the more I read, and the more frequently I read, the more that depth of spirit came through in this book. Someone who is willing to take on a very challenging topic and to do so without losing that sense of groundedness, without losing faith, without growing cynical and pessimistic. That's no small task, and she rises to it beautifully. In addition to being a lifelong Baptist, she is trained in constitutional law. She is head of the Baptist Joint Committee on Religious Freedom in Washington, D.C., which is the only faith-based organization in D.C. that deals with religious freedom. The issues of religious freedom, not just for Christians, but for all peoples. She is also the lead organizer of Christians Against Christian Nationalism. I remember when we first started promoting this book study, and I remember the first time this cover was on the screen, and during the announcement time, Lindsay poked a little fun at the title, okay, How to End Christian Nationalism. So about that title, I think those of us in the class learned that how to end is not about a quick fix, that something as pervasive, something as deeply rooted in our country's history as Christian nationalism would not be fixed in 8 easy steps. So think of it as how to end, as about how to work toward ending Christian nationalism. Something that we likely will not see in our own lifetimes, no matter how young the youngest person in the room might be. It is not a quick fix, but a slow and patient work, which means that the more of us that are aware of the work of standing up to Christian nationalism, the more effective we can be. So this is about learning to recognize Christian nationalism, learning to confront it, to stand up to it, and eventually, hopefully, to dismantle it, to work toward loosening its current grip, certainly in the halls of power in this nation and in many, many church congregations. So I'd like to begin by and we'll move to that second slide. I'd like to give you an overview of the book, and these are the steps that she gives us in learning to end Christian nationalism, and these are the chapters of the book. There are 8 steps that she gives, beginning with naming and understanding the threat of Christian nationalism, moving on to grounding ourselves in God's love, which is a critical starting place. I think many of us notice without too much difficulty that what seems to be missing in a lot of what we see of Christian nationalism is indeed Christian love. And if we as Christians believe that love is at the heart of our understanding of who God is, love is at the heart of understanding who we are in relationship to that God who is love. Love is at the heart of understanding who Jesus is, whose life and work we seek to emulate. To miss the piece of love is indeed to miss the heart of it. So that is a very important inner piece of the inner work as we address this work. And then we move on to denouncing violence, that nationalism distinguishes itself from patriotism by embracing violence as a means to achieving its goals. And then the step 4 is commit to the separation of church and state, which means that we, first of all, get ourselves a little pocket copy of the Constitution and familiarize ourselves with it. The 20th century theologian Karl Barth said that we should read the Bible in one hand and have the newspaper in the other. And now I would suggest we need 3 hands, one for the Bible, one for the newspaper, and one for the Constitution. So commitment to that core principle of our nation's founding, which is indeed the separation of church and state. And then step number 5 is to take on Christian nationalism close to home. And in this step, she addresses any Christian nationalism in our own congregations, as well as the Christian nationalism that we may have in ourselves, as well as members of our family. And I think I would be willing to guess that there is not a person here who doesn't have at least one cousin or brother-in-law or someone in the family that you might have had lively conversations with or avoided lively conversations with. And then step 6 is about organizing for change. So we're moving out more into the public sphere. She devotes a step to protecting religious freedom in public schools, because often public schools is the site, the local site of manifestations of Christian nationalism ideology, where that we can read about in the newspaper and show up for if necessary. And then finally, taking our place in the public square. So that's an overview of the book. And then I would like to just make a few further comments that are taken from the first chapter of her book. So moving on to slide 4. And this is a definition. In the first chapter, when we're naming and trying to understand what Christian nationalism is, she gives us a, I think, very good working definition. Christian nationalism is a political ideology and cultural framework that seeks to fuse American and Christian identities. It suggests that real Americans are Christians and that true Christians hold a particular set of political beliefs. It seeks to create a society in which only this narrow subset of Americans is privileged by law and societal practice. So I'd like us to consider that definition. Is there anything in it that particularly leaps out at you as being noteworthy? Pardon me? Political ideology. And okay, why does the political leap out? Okay. Okay, but I think her point is that not that necessarily that Christian nationalism sees itself as political, but that her description of Christian nationalism is that it is a political ideology. Okay, so, okay, we're clear on that. Sorry, the executive function is always the first to go. Any other things, Jan? Okay, so what isn't there is the word white. Okay, what isn't there is also the word male. Not that women are not Christian nationalists, but boy, I think at the top of the pyramid is the white, heterosexual, cisgendered male. But yes, that's left out.
Well, there's nothing in there about Jesus or love or, anything that I would believe are the true Christian values.
Okay. So if it's a political ideology and a cultural framework, it doesn't say that it's a Christian denomination or Christian movement.
It doesn't seem to embody the Christian ideology of love and Jesus and service and taking care of other people.
Okay, so
I'm struck by the limiting factor
the limiting factor of the final sentence? Okay.
It's prejudicial.
Okay, so it's a narrow subset of Americans who are real Americans because they are true Christians. So,
I just wonder
yes.
how they're defining Christian. How are they defining Christian in this?
I would offer also that, to that point, that there's a very clear separation between someone who is evangelical point of view, that someone's either saved or they're not saved. If they're not saved, they're heathens, and therefore the other. And so there's absolutely no ecumenical or genuine sense of, in Christ's sense of accepting everyone as part of a community under Christ, as opposed to this black and white separation.
Okay. Yes, so not only is it not interfaith, but it's not within Christianity, there's no sense of any breadth or difference.
Can you pass the mic when the people on Zoom
Yes.
cannot hear?
Okay.
Or we get a second mic, you can keep your own or repeat what they're saying, which would be easier.
Okay.
Whichever.
I'll try. Well,
Let's get another mic. Yeah, let's get another mic and I'll pass it around.
okay.
Claudia.
Something about the last sentence, because I think it's so important.
Yes.
What was I going to say? I think that, so often we say, how can they be so heartless about like SNAP or, all these things that they push for that are cruel to so many people. And I think it's in that last sentence. I think that that really the only people that they think are worth worrying about or caring about or tending to are themselves, those people. I really think that explains why they can be so dismissive. When we all say, but what about Christian and love and all this stuff, blah blah blah, empathy and Matthew, all that. I think that last sentence, sorry, I'm reckless, explains it because I think they think these are the people that matter. Nobody else matters.
Okay.
They stop shouting.
Okay.
And,
Yeah.
that no one else matters. That's
Okay.
sorry.
So Claudia was pointing out that in this idea of the narrow subset, there may be some explanation for some of the cruelty and heartlessness that we see. And I think, once you privilege any particular religion, then you have other religions that are second class, which means that you also have second class citizens who adhere to those second class religions. And that's that danger of the privilege. Okay. Others, yes.
Nancy.
Yeah. Okay.
I just wanted to say that in some small defense of Christian nationalists, they actually do care about each other. Love is important. Taking care of those within their group who are, less advantaged. They do all those things that we think of as being very important to Christian life, but they only do it for themselves and for each other, and they really do live in a world where there's us and them, and those are very separate groups of people.
Good. Thank you, Cynthia. Others? Lynn, Mary.
I'm struck by the cultural framework that seeks to fuse American and Christian identities. It's so subtle, but one thing that came to mind as I read it was a pattern for a needlepoint cushion that I saw once that had the flag wrapped around the cross. And, this is this kind of is out there, and even more subtle things like the use of God bless America. I mean, sometimes it's not said at all in a prayerful manner. It's not a prayer. And but it's said more in a nationalistic way, that separates us from, as if God cared where we draw our property lines. So anyway, there's probably many others, and I'm going to be more alert, I hope. Yes.
I just want to say I can see some international parallels in terms of what's happening in Israel and the far right there also.
The criterion that is important to me is when they're talking about real or Christian, are they talking about it in terms of a inclusive sense or in terms of an exclusionary sense? If it's exclusionary, then I don't think they can call themselves Christian.
I would like to encourage this small part of the circles in the yes. Expand the circle just a bit.
There's a chair up front.
And there is a chair up front.
It's actually not up front because this is a circle. Okay. Yes. Ah. Mm. Yes. Okay. Yeah. Yeah, I think once your antennae begin to raise on these things, you notice such things. Okay, any other comments or responses? Okay, and then moving on to the next slide. This is another point that I just wanted to make fairly quickly. These are the only statistics that will be thrown at you today, but this comes actually from 2020, and as we know, much has happened in the last 5 years, so it'd be interesting to see more current statistics, but as of the writing of this book from which these come, this is a snapshot of the lay of the land, that there are less than 20%, somewhat less than 20% of those polled who fully support Christian nationalism. And these authors of this book called that class of folks ambassadors. And then we see 32% who somewhat support Christian nationalism. 32%, and then 27% who somewhat reject Christian nationalism, the resistors, and then 22% who fully reject Christian nationalism. So we see that there's in that middle, those middle two categories, 59% of people. And we won't spend a lot of time with this, but there are other polls that Tyler quotes in this book that give fairly similar picture of that distribution, which she thinks is hopeful. Hopeful that there's a broad swath of people who aren't fully ensconced in either side. Think of them as persuadable. Think of them as people that we might be able to sit down with and have a conversation and communicate different points of view without getting nasty or violent about it. So I imagine that hopefully as we know more about Christian nationalism, and polls have also showed this, that the more people know what we're talking about when we say Christian nationalism, the more likely they are to reject it. So there's lots of misunderstanding about what it means, lots of gray area, lots of fuzzy notions of where faith and the state or politics meet. Marguerite? Out. Well,
How large a group of people was studied to get these percentages?
I would have to go to the original book to get that. So, but she doesn't quote just this set of statistics. And this book, Taking Back America for God, is a major scholarly tome. So I would trust that the authors would be fair with statistics. But yes, it does add up to more than 100%. That's why you have that less than sign under that first category. But she quotes other polls as well that show pretty much the same thing. The good news is that, as I said, that it seems to be that the more people know what Christian nationalism is, the more likely they are to reject it. If someone thinks of themselves as being a Christian nationalist because they think faith should inform how they vote, well, I think that might include everyone here. So as hopefully our information and our definitions clarify, that we head farther south on that particular scale. Yep.
Well, I think we know, but it'd be interesting to compare those statistics with your political leaning. You know, how those people at the top fully support, you suppose it'd be Republicans or Democrats? I mean, we think we know, but I wonder if there's any data on that.
I think that that is brought up in this chapter, but also what she correlates with is the identification of Christian nationalism or the support of Christian nationalism, the correlation with other factors, racism, misogyny, disdain for immigrants or refugees. So there's a whole constellation of attitudes and ideas that correlate with these statistics. So, Alan.
just as a quick, perfect example of identifying Christian nationalism is the battle that some of us as pastors have had to fight over the years, whether the American flag belongs in the sanctuary.
And in the chapter on facing Christian nationalism close to home, that is an issue that she deals with. And the Baptist Joint Committee has put out a set of guidelines for that, actually, to, designate when it might be appropriate to have an American flag in the sanctuary. Other parts of the church where an American flag would not conflict with the worship of God. And so that is, in some churches, an important issue. Okay, and then just one more thing from that first chapter that I'd like to highlight on the next slide is the myth of the U.S. being a Christian nation. And again, Tyler formulates this as one way of understanding this notion. So those who believe that the United States is a Christian nation, believe that it was founded as a Christian nation based on Christian principles and has a special role to play in God's plan for humankind. If our leadership or national values stray from traditional Christianity, God will withdraw his blessings from the nation. So, well, that's part of the myth. So, and we'll come back to this if we have time. But at this point, unless there is any further comment on what we've already been considering, Stacy?
The myth, if you read through that, it has all the elements of the rationalization for manifest destiny.
Good observation. Okay, so I am inviting Jack Wixie to say a few words.
Well, I think what's mainly in my mind is after the group that we had, after the study group, what the consequence for me was that it deepened my interest and activity in interfaith work, because it seemed to me that what we're dealing with today globally is that all of the Abrahamic religions are at war with one another. And in fact, I think maybe it's only partially true to call Christian nationalism nationalistic, because the current administration in particular is an international alliance around what Anne was saying earlier. I think that we're in a time of religious nationalism in many, many parts of the world. It's not just an American phenomenon. And why is that the case, I think, is a really interesting and complicated question. What has been driving the nation-state system toward totalitarianism, and around these social issues, great prejudice based on what people consider to be traditional values, right? So in my interfaith work, for example, I had a conversation with a Bulgarian Orthodox deacon who is in tragic sorrow over what's happening between the Russian and Ukrainian Orthodox churches, which are at war with one another there. So again, it's not just a narrow phenomenon here, but it is, of course, a long-standing historical reality in America, which I think really began as the country moved into civil war. At the time of the Civil War, both the abolitionist and the separatist Southern movements both invoked the Bible, right? Up until a point at which it became impossible any longer to feel that there was any real unity in Christianity. And I think that's an issue that we face today, that we don't know as a people what Christianity means. There is no common understanding in our time of what it means to be a Christian. So we who believe, I think, in or practice or try to practice the social gospel with regard to social issues want to stand back and say, well, those people are not Christians, right? They don't have heart. And on the other side of the aisle, if you want to put it that way, they're saying, well, you people are lost. You know, you're trapped in pornography and you're trapped in a certain kind of lifestyle that has no longer any essential meaning or value. And urban-rural issues are part of this as well, right? In our world, that very comparable to, I had Bonhoeffer on the slide today, comparable to the kinds of issues that were developing in Germany during the rise of the Nazi Party. The urban-rural conflict there was really significant, and it is really significant in this issue that divides Christianity today as well. There was an article in the New York Times this morning written by two columnists who cover religion for the Times, and they don't use the term Christian nationalism in any of their coverage, partly because there's confusion about the meaning, but they said because Christian nationalism has come out of the academic world, the concept of it started as a critique, as a historical critique, which I think is true, you know, like settler colonialism, let's say, in terms of the situation in Gaza. These are historians who have tried to think through these issues. But so the Times journalists are saying, well, we can't use that phrase in our writings because we can't put people in a situation where they're thinking we're holding them to be not Christian. Right? We can't be in that critical mode, and that to the extent to which people identify as Christian nationalists, they think they have to save it from a negative connotation, which is, I think, true in the concept itself. To me, part of the issue of the difficulty of overcoming, I would say overcoming Christian nationalism, is that they're both American, domestic, and foreign policy issues that are really central to this conflict, that we need to really think broadly about why is it that the nation-state system is trapped in a kind of odd nationalistic withdrawal at the same time that we see these alliances being developed around social issues that are very problematic for the history of our congregation, which was so very much involved initially in the abolition movement. So I think part of the consequence of Christian nationalism today is trying to abolish the history of the abolition movement, redefining racism, making racism no longer or civil rights, really, even any longer part of the tradition that came out of the civil rights movement and that was grounded in the abolition movement. That's a big lot to overcome. So I just say it's a serious issue. Pass to somebody, don't mean to put it down.
Thank you, Jack, for complicating our our thinking even further. And Tyler does make the point in the course of her book that religious nationalism is not just an American phenomenon, but she chooses to narrow her focus to that in the country. So, Cynthia, do you have time or do you need to?
Nancy asked me to share with you guys. Linda and I work out with the same physical trainer, and as the last 10 years have gone by, there was the pandemic, and there was Trump, and then there was pandemic, and then there was Trump again. She gets more and more upset about our political state. And I went in one time to work with her, and she was in a kerfuffle about these Christians. And I said to her, hold on, Diane, back off. You know, there's Christians, and there's Christians, and there's Christians, and there's Christians, and we are not all the same, and it is not fair to paint us all under the same blanket. We are different. And that's an important thing to realize, because there's a whole gradation of what calls itself Christianity.
And thank you for that.
I even gave her a couple of my books that I first got when I joined this church, just to show her that we're not all the way she thinks.
Yeah. Good.
And she did thank us later for doing that. She
Yes.
had an effect.
So what feels like a very small opportunity to respond to an everyday little thing, a comment that someone makes, becomes, a time to plant a little well-placed seed. And so I think that if we are tuned in to the issue, that opportunity will present itself to speak up in a kind and loving way. And to remember that Christian nationalism is the face of Christianity that many people in this country see. And sometimes it is the only face that they are familiar with. And so they think this is all Christians. To be a different kind of Christian and to perhaps help educate others that it's really not legitimate to ever just say Christians and then make a blanket statement. Is there anyone else from the class who would like to comment? Claudia. Just hold that thought, Claudia. Don't forget what you're talking about.
Two things. One, I think it just underlines what Linda and Cynthia were saying, and their action underline the thing that Jack was saying about the definition of Christian in these times. And I just noticed it the other day when I was somewhere, and I've been in the ER lately and stuff, so you always have to put your religious thing. And I was actually a little bit hesitant to do so because of what I thought that would mean to people generally. And whenever I'm around people and mention I'm a Christian, I also mention something that shows our church believes in the social gospel. The other thing is, I don't know if this is true, and I'd be interested in what other people think, and it's kind of academic, I'm not sure it matters, but my theory is that this shift worldwide to the right and to dictatorship is driven by racism and white supremacy as a result of the refugees that have been forced to leave their own countries due to dictatorships or climate change or all these things. We saw it in Germany, I think first maybe, and and her book. What I loved about her book is that it goes back to the Pope, in the 1500s or 1400s, and makes clear that white supremacy has been a part of Christianity, let alone Christian nationalism, for more than a couple centuries. And I thought that was so. I didn't know that. I thought that was so informative, and like I say, I wonder if that isn't what's driving the countries around the world to the right, is the refugees, which result from unfair conditions, whether climate change or dictatorships. Thanks. Thanks for listening to me twice. I appreciate it. I'll try to be quiet now.
No, don't try to be quiet. Thank you for your input, Claudia. And I certainly believe that mass migrations of humans around the planet are part of that unsettling conditions that drive many people into a state of fear. And where there's fear, there's the need to often circle the wagons and put up the walls of self-protection. And so that, I believe, and climate change is also part of that unsettling, and it has all come to a head, perhaps, in recent times.
Small comment, just to add to what Claudia said, is that we also have to remember that population on Earth is now population on Earth right now is 8 billion, over 8 billion people, and soon to be 9. And so this is a tripling of the Earth's population since 1950. I mean, a very short period of time. And with this, the dislodgement of people for political reasons, for political instability, and for climate change is simply adding to this sort of pressure I think many people feel about scarcity of resources and so forth that go with that. And so I think all of this is simply exacerbating or making worse this sense of the other versus those who have what we have. And by the way, this is quite random, but the one thing that really struck me about, Nancy, about what you listened to the beginning, was that Christian nationalists embrace violence. That was just news to me. I was not aware of that. You said Christian nationalism on your list up front, about what defines it. One of the definitions on your list in the beginning, the author's list, was it they embrace political violence. That was on your first slide. I was really surprised. I was not aware that was the case, or if there's anecdotal or any other kind of evidence that says that.
Well, at the very beginning of the book, Tyler talks about how, as her work with Baptist Joint Committee, her concern has long been for advocating religious freedom. And it wasn't until January 6th, 2021, and the insurrection at the Capitol, that she really became alarmed at the issue of Christian nationalism.
And the violence, I guess, that goes with that. I was unaware that Christian nationalism advocated political violence.
It's not, I'm not saying that it's part of any manifesto that's formally out there that all Christian nationalists of any strength adhere to and pledge allegiance to, but there is a strong tendency to believe that violence is okay if used for certain holy purposes. So we don't want to paint with too broad a brush, definitely. But I believe that Pamela Cooper White, in her book about the psychology of Christian nationalism, also distinguishes patriotism from nationalism, in that nationalists are willing, some of them willing, to feel that violence is justified in certain pursuits when you're following the will of God. And we can see where they might read certain parts of the Hebrew scriptures, what we call the Old Testament, and also feel biblically justified in that as well.
I suppose the hymn "Onward Christian Soldiers" is a rather strong example of that.
Yes. I think that's been expurgated from the most recent United Methodist hymnal. But I certainly have fond memories of singing it in my childhood Baptist church. Yep.
So one of the things that came to mind is when we're talking about population growth, is there's also a push for trad marriages and trad wives. So they see maybe a browner population growing, and they want white women to stay home and stop working and have more babies.
Yes. And one of the best things to read on Christian nationalism and patriarchy is the book Jesus and John Wayne by Kristen Kobes Dumais. It's an excellent book on that whole head of the household, the strength of the male in the household and in the society. Stacy?
I think it's significant when you think about their misconception of what strength is. They use violence as their method of showing that they're strong. But the question that you have to always ask is, which individual is stronger, the one who's gentle or the one who's violent?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Very good point. So Susan, you're holding the mic.
Only because it was given to me.
Any other comment, Diane?
I'm wondering, in my own mind, I kind of separate, is the violence done from the fear? Is the fear done from feeling so vulnerable that you, especially if you're cornered, what would it take would you protect yourself with a gun, with a this or that? What would you do?
I think they're probably very strong connectors to fear at the root of violence.
Well, I can't contain myself, can I? This is kind of academic, but it kind of follows her. You know, we had the quote from the reading from Bonhoeffer today, and in terms of violence, it's very interesting to remember that he was a devout Christian. I mean, totally inspirational to many, many people over the years. And he came to, join in the plot to kill Hitler. And it's just an interesting, so I just throw that in. I don't think it's totally pertinent to the Christian nationalism, but it's just interesting, and I couldn't help but think of it given that we had that wonderful quote. In fact, if anyone's interested in a book study on Bonhoeffer, like especially maybe those letters from prison, I'd be interested in doing that. So maybe send me an email or something. Okay, enough.
And the question is worth pondering, and perhaps many of you have pondered it greatly. At what point would I myself be tempted to use violence, even extreme violence? What degree of threat would possibly pull that out of me? The question of self-defense always raises its head, and defense not only of myself, but of loved ones, people who are dear to me. At what point do my good pacifist beliefs get set aside? I hope I never find out.
Oh, I'll share a brief story, partly because, you're aware that we've been doing nonviolent training here at the church. People have been being trained in nonviolent practical attitudes with regard to situations. The pantry here, the food pantry, has walkie-talkies in case ice comes, for example, things like that. But I wanted to say, I think we're human beings are prone to violence, right? This is true for all of us. So I'll tell just briefly this story. I've mentioned it to a few people. This was in the early 80s in Illinois when I was involved in civil disobedience at a nuclear power plant that had been developing toxic waste and along Lake Michigan, a beautiful stretch of Lake Michigan. And we had organized the Chihuahua Alliance, Chicago, Milwaukee, and I was in Waukegan, just south of Zion, where the nuclear power plant was. Zion, yeah. We wanted to be arrested. We made contacts with all sorts of people, with the press, with the security people at the plant. We were going to block shift change on two sides of the nuclear power plant. It's like many miles around the chain link fence around a nuclear power plant. I'm there on one side of the plant with a group of people. They decided to come out and move around into the front of the plant and just wiped people out who were sitting there passively waiting to block the shift change. So we all ran from the back to the front of the plant and saw that everyone was in disarray. People had been knocked down, tents had been ripped up, and a group of us just all sat around, sad, and the cops went away, the press had gone away. People we made all these arrangements with were not there to observe any of what had happened. Nobody was going to be arrested. That was just the end of it. And as we were sitting there in disarray, the head of security, who I had myself helped and negotiated with him about what we were planning to do because we were trying to be straightforward, he came out walking by us to his car in the parking lot. And as he passed by, he did this. I'd never seen anybody do that except, like a joke, or in my personal life, I'd never observed anyone doing that. Saying, we beat you, we got you, tough, you know. And he walked by us to his car, and all of a sudden, somebody said, let's get him. And all of us, me too, got up and started chasing this guy to his car. Yeah? Group of nonviolent activists. But we had had nonviolent training. So at a certain point, this based on a Quaker practice, and so at a certain point, somebody said, will anybody block consensus? That was the tactic that we would do if we were in a difficult situation. And I said, yes. Everybody stopped. They all looked around at me, and I said, I don't want to do this. But it had taken me a while to get to that point, because I was on my feet too, right? The whole mob was ready to happen, whole mob of nonviolent activists. But everybody stopped. And that's the virtue of nonviolent training, is that you need to have a real sense of devotion to the solidarity of the people that you're working with and to a principle of nonviolence. So I recommend nonviolent training whenever I can.
Thanks for sharing that, Jack. That just seems to me the hardest of the hard work. Just what's going to pull on the deepest stuff that we have. And I think so often of Martin Luther King and his whole approach to nonviolence and how it had to go down to the soles of his feet and just keep going, because this isn't stuff that you pull from little notions that are floating around in the top part of your head. This has to somehow be in the cells of your body. So, man, that's the cutting edge for all of us, yes, to become those kind of people in this world. So let us never think we have arrived. I'm a long way from that, a long way to go. But that's where our imagination can kick in. All right, we're nearing, a few more minutes. Is there anything else that anyone would like to say? It's a big old wobbly topic.
One of the things friends of mine have commented on is so many of the people who stand for the Trump administration are blonde women with little gold crosses around their neck. And obviously the cross is a broader symbol. So I was thinking, but I also agree with the interfaith idea and agree, like, is there a symbol where we can say we stand for the gospel other than putting a Bible around our neck? And the gospel part, maybe Luke or Mark or something. But it's not something we can answer immediately, but I like Celtic crosses. Ours evokes kind of a Celtic cross simply. But I also, in some ways, want to say I am a Christian to promote gospel Christianity or Jesus Christ Methodist Christianity. So obviously a little gold cross is maybe not the way to go, but it's more of a question.
It sounds like the work of an artist to ponder, Jan. But yes, good question. And our symbols are important. So I hope you will keep thinking about that. Keep us posted. Anne?
Time for us to leave, but I sure hope we get a chance to talk about that more, because it's very upsetting to me not to feel comfortable wearing a cross. And I hope we can figure this out together.
Yep. Yes, as I heard over here, uncomfortable flying an American flag, uncomfortable wearing a cross around our neck, yes. All right, friends. Slide number 7, James Baldwin. Not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced. So that's why we do this work of reading books that we just as soon not have to read. Man, I love to read, and reading about Christian nationalism is not my choice. But what can we do? And I think this work of continuing to educate ourselves in choosing what we read and choosing what we read with others is really important. I think the example that Cynthia brought up with her physical trainer and the gentle education of others is important. Any conversations that we can have with family or friends with the intent not to convert someone, but to listen to them and to have some kind of sense to the degree that we are able of why they have the views that they have, what context in their own lives does that grow out of. Just keeping our eyes and ears open for local opportunities that may come up, local issues that may involve some shade of Christian nationalism, and also to simply continue to promote and celebrate diversity and pluralism. And we do that here at Christ Church. I'm reminded of Richard Rohr's saying that the best counter to the bad is the practice of the better. So I think that the more we commit to being this kind of church at Christ Church, that's a powerful statement in and of itself. There are organizations that you can support, and I always put at the top of my list Americans United for the separation of church and state. They've been doing their good work since 1947, and they win cases. Lots and lots of, and I bet appeals also, Al. I get those too. Christians Against Christian Nationalism and Faithful America are also two excellent organizations. I have a front and back resource list up here of good things to read and other information. And we'll close with a little quote from James Tallarico. Has anyone ever heard of James Tallarico? Okay, you can tell that he is a youngster. He's a Texan. James Tallarico is a member of the Texas State Legislature. This year, he is running against Senator John Cornyn for a seat in the United States Senate. James Tallarico is also a student at Austin Presbyterian Seminary. So, and he is an amazing young man. He's one of these fresh-faced, young-looking guys who can stand up and just the perfect stuff just comes out of his mouth flawlessly. So he's a channel. He is a channel. Now, theocracy, which is a government of religious authoritarians, he says is the worst form of government, because the only thing worse than a tyrant is a tyrant who believes he is on a mission from God. So with those words ringing in our ears, let's continue to deepen our own commitment to being the kinds of Christians that put love at the center, who denounce violence, who celebrate pluralism, who relish and revel in diversity, to speak up when we have the opportunity, to show up when there is the need, and to keep reading those books that we'd rather not read. And so with that, thank you for coming. Thanks, tech team especially, and we continue in this ongoing, slow, patient work of standing up to something not so good with the practice of something much better.